can figure out how to do it. And you can pay them $10 million a fight, $30 million a fight.
December 1st, 2017. A fighter just won a UFC championship. First Native American champion in history. Career-defining moment. The kind of night that changes everything. Paycheck? Around $24,000. Meanwhile, CM Punk, a professional wrestler with a 0-1 UFC record, banked $500,000 for his second fight. He lost again. UFC champions are supposed to be at the top of the sport, the elite, the best in the world. But some champions made less money than a regional manager at Walmart. Some defended their titles multiple times and couldn't afford a decent training camp. Some had historic reigns and still left the sport broke. This is the top 5 worst-paid UFC champions of all time. Real numbers, real stories. And by number 1, the disrespect is going to blow minds. Coming in at number 5, Nico Montano, the UFC's first women's flyweight champion. December 2017, The Ultimate Fighter Season 26 Souls. Finale. Montano entered the tournament as the number 14 seed out of 16 fighters. Professional record, 3-2. UFC experience, 0. Nobody gave her a chance. She beat Lauren Murphy, beat Montana De La Rosa, beat former Invicta FC champion Barb Honchak. Then in the finals, she dominated Roxanne Modafferi over 5 rounds. Judges scored it 50-45, 49-46, 49-46. Nico Montano became the first women's flyweight champion in UFC history. First Native American champion ever. Her story? Incredible. Grew up on the Navajo Reservation in Arizona. Father owned a boxing gym, died when she was 16. Worked as a lifeguard and yoga instructor. Was considering quitting MMA entirely just months before The Ultimate Fighter. Classic underdog story. The UFC should have made her a star. Feature documentaries, media tours, promotional campaigns. This was Hollywood-level material. Instead, Bleacher Report called her the most anonymous, underpromoted UFC champion ever. The numbers are brutal. Based on typical TUF finale contracts and her experience level, Montano likely made around $12,000 to show, $12,000 to win, roughly $24,000 to become a world champion. That's less than what prelim fighters were making on big cards. But it gets worse. The UFC immediately scheduled her first title defense against Valentina Shevchenko, made Montano the biggest underdog for any defending champion in history. The message was clear. Shevchenko was the real star. Montano was just keeping the belt warm. September 2018. UFC 228. Montano gets hospitalized during her weight cut. Kidney issues. Fight canceled. UFC strips her of the title immediately. She never defended her championship. 0 title defenses. Never got paid like a champion. Never got promoted like a champion. 9 months wearing a belt, then it was gone. Montano fought one more time in the UFC. Lost to Juliana Pena in July 2019. Then nothing. Over the next 2 years, 8 different fights got canceled or postponed. Weight-cutting issues. Medical problems. July 2021. Scheduled to fight Wu Yanan. Misses weight by 7 pounds. UFC cuts her immediately. Here's the tragic part. Montano couldn't afford top-level nutritionists. Couldn't afford the best training camps. The UFC paid her so little that she probably had to work other jobs. Then when she struggled with weight cuts, something that proper medical support could have helped with, they blamed her and threw her away. She became a UFC champion and got essentially nothing from it. No financial security, no career momentum, no lasting impact, just a footnote in history that most fans have already forgotten. The first women's flyweight champion made roughly $24,000 for the biggest win of her career, got stripped without defending, and was discarded before ever getting paid like a champion should be paid. Number 4. Renan Barão, the forgotten bantamweight king. Here's a name casual fans might not even remember. But from 2012 to 2014, Renan Barão was considered one of the most dangerous fighters on the planet. The interim bantamweight champion who defended his belt 4 times. Then, when Dominic Cruz couldn't return from injury, the UFC promoted Barão to undisputed champion. His record during that stretch? Undefeated in 32 straight fights. 32. He was finishing people left and right. Flying knee KO against Michael McDonald. Submission wins over Brad Pickett and Eddie Wineland. Dominant decisions over Uriah Faber twice. Barone was putting on highlight reel performances. Fast, technical, dangerous from everywhere. Analysts were calling him one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. The paychecks? Shockingly low for someone that dominant. When Barone defended his interim title against Eddie Wineland at UFC 165 in September 2013, his disclosed purse was $58,000 to show, $58,000 to win, $116,000 total for an interim champion with a 32-fight win streak. His disclosed pay for fighting Michael McDonald at UFC on Fuel TV 7, where he landed that spectacular flying knee knockout, was even lower. $54,000, $108,000 for one of the most vicious knockouts of the year. Compare that to what other champions were making at the time. Georges St-Pierre was making $400,000 base purses, plus millions in PPV points. Anderson Silva was getting similar numbers. Cain Velasquez was pulling in $300,000 base pays. Barone was dominating opponents just as thoroughly, had a longer win streak than any of them, and was making a fifth of what they were getting. Maybe less when PPV points are factored in. The UFC's excuse? The bantamweight division didn't draw. Same narrative they used for flyweights. Doesn't matter if fighters are exciting, skilled, and dominant. If the UFC decides a division doesn't matter, champions in that division don't get paid. TJ Dillashaw broke the streak in May 2014, knocking Barone out in the 5th round. Barone was never the same after that. Lost the rematch, lost to Dillashaw again. Suddenly, the unbeatable champion was on a losing streak. He fought in the UFC until 2017, then got cut, finished his UFC career, with a record that still included victories over some of the best bantamweights in history. But he never got paid like the elite champion he was during that 32-fight win streak. Renan Barão went 32 fights undefeated, defended a UFC title 4 times, and was making base purses around $116,000, while champions in other divisions were making millions. Another example of the UFC deciding certain divisions just don't matter, regardless of how talented the fighters are. Number 3. Jens Pulver, the UFC's first lightweight champion. Some history here. The lightweight division didn't always exist in the UFC. It got scrapped in the early days, brought back in 2001, UFC 30, February 2001. Jens Pulver defeats Caol Uno by majority decision to become the first ever UFC lightweight champion. Pulver was tough as nails, fought out of Miletich Fighting Systems, one of the best camps in MMA at the time. Trained with Matt Hughes, Robbie Lawler, Tim Sylvia. He was technical, he was tough, and he had knockout power in those little gloves. He defended the title twice, submitted Dennis Hallman with a rear naked choke at UFC 33, beat BJ Penn by majority decision at UFC 35. Controversial decision, but a win nonetheless. Here's where it gets absurd. Pulver's contract for those championship fights? Reports suggest he was making around $15,000 to show, $15,000 to win, roughly $30,000 per title defense. In 2001-2002, that might sound reasonable, except it wasn't. The UFC was already paying other champions significantly more. Chuck Liddell was getting $50,000 or $60,000 per fight at the time, and he wasn't even champion yet. Randy Couture as champion was getting 6-figure purses. Pulver asked for more money. The UFC said no. According to interviews Pulver did years later, he was told the lightweight division wasn't important. They couldn't justify paying him more, so Pulver left, walked away from the UFC as champion. The UFC stripped him and shut down the entire lightweight division. Didn't bring it back for 4 years. Pulver fought in pride. He fought in smaller organizations, made decent money, but nothing spectacular. By the time the UFC brought back the lightweight division in 2006, Pulver's best years were behind him. He returned to the UFC, lost to BJ Penn in their rematch, lost to Joe Lauzon, retired with a 22-15 record. But during his prime, when he was UFC lightweight champion, he was making $30,000 per fight while asking for better pay and being told no. The lightweight division is now one of the most important divisions in the UFC. Champions make millions. The belt has been held by legends like BJ Penn, Frankie Edgar, Benson Henderson, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Conor McGregor. But the first lightweight champion? He made $30,000 per title defense, got told the division didn't matter, and walked away rather than accept the disrespect. Jens Pulver proved a point. The UFC would rather shut down an entire division than pay a champion fairly. And they did exactly that. Number 2. Carlos Newton, the welterweight champion who got screwed twice. UFC 31, May 2001. Carlos Newton faces Pat Miletich for the UFC welterweight championship. Newton was a slick Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, submissions from everywhere. He called himself the Ronin, the masterless samurai. 4th round, Newton locks in a bulldog choke on Miletich, squeezes. Miletich goes unconscious. Referee John McCarthy stops the fight. Carlos Newton becomes the UFC welterweight champion. His purse for winning the title? Approximately $10,000 to show, $10,000 to win. $20,000 to become a UFC champion, $20,000. For context, that same year Randy Couture was making over $100,000 per fight. Tito Ortiz was pulling in similar numbers, but Newton, a skilled, exciting fighter with a black belt in BJJ, got $20,000 for winning a world championship. It gets worse. Newton's first and only title defense came at UFC 34 against Matt Hughes in November 2001. This fight is famous. Hughes picks Newton up while Newton has him in a triangle choke. Hughes slams Newton. Both fighters go unconscious simultaneously. Newton from the impact of the slam. Hughes from the choke. Both wake up. The referee awards the fight to Hughes by knockout. Controversy, debate. Was it a slam KO, or did Hughes go unconscious from the choke first? Should it have been a no contest? Newton lost his title in one of the most controversial finishes in UFC history. His purse for that title defense? Again, around $20,000 total. Here's the real insult. Carlos Newton left the UFC after that fight. Not because he was bitter about the controversial loss, because the UFC's pay was so low he couldn't make a living as champion. Newton went to Pride in Japan. In Pride, he made significantly more money fighting the same level of competition. His disclosed purse for fighting Kazushi Sakuraba in 2002 was reportedly around $70,000, more than triple what the UFC was paying him. Think about that. The UFC welterweight champion could make more money in Japan fighting for Pride than defending his title in the UFC. That's not a market rate issue. That's the UFC choosing not to pay their champions fairly. Newton eventually returned to the UFC in 2009 for a brief stint, lost 2 fights and retired. Finished his UFC career with a 4-2 record. But in his prime, when he was welterweight champion, the UFC paid him $20,000 per fight and seemed genuinely surprised when he left for better pay elsewhere. The UFC lost their welterweight champion because they wouldn't pay him more than $20,000 per fight. And instead of learning from that mistake, they continued the same pattern with other champions for years. Number 1. Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, the most disrespected champion in UFC history. This isn't just the worst paid champion. This is the most talented, most dominant, most accomplished fighter to ever be completely screwed over by UFC pay structure. The numbers are stunning. The disrespect is generational. By the time this story is done, the contrast between Johnson's skill and his compensation is going to be absolutely infuriating. March 2011. Demetrius Johnson challenges Dominic Cruz for the UFC bantamweight title. Johnson is fast, technical, with wrestling credentials and submission skills. He's undersized for bantamweight, but still competitive. His contract, $14,000 to show, $14,000 to win, $28,000 to fight for a championship. Johnson loses that fight, but proves he belongs at the elite level. The UFC creates a flyweight division in 2012. Johnson defeats Joseph Benavidez to become the inaugural champion. Then something unprecedented happens. Johnson goes on an 11-fight title defense streak. 11, still a UFC record for any weight class. The victories weren't boring decisions. Johnson was finishing elite opponents in spectacular fashion. Guillotine choke over Joseph Benavidez in the rematch. Knocked out John Dodson. Armbarred Ray Borg after suplexing him in midair. One of the most spectacular finishes in UFC history. Dominated Henry Cejudo in their first fight. Made world-class fighters look completely outmatched. Analysts called him the pound-for-pound best fighter on the planet. His technical skills were unmatched. His fight IQ was genius level. His cardio was endless. His wrestling was elite. His submissions were legitimate. But here's the problem. The UFC had decided flyweights didn't matter. After Johnson knocked out Benavidez to retain his title, he signed a new contract. $125,000 to show, $50,000 to win. $175,000 per fight. That's his pay as champion. As the most dominant champion in the organization, while defending his title over and over again. Then Johnson asked about pay-per-view points. Every other champion got PPV points. It's standard. It's how champions make real money. The UFC's response, Johnson revealed this in a 2024 video, was direct. We do not give pay-per-view points to flyweight guys. Not a negotiation, not a discussion, just a flat refusal. Flyweights don't get PPV points. So Johnson kept defending his title, $175,000 per fight. No PPV points, no special bonuses. Just a flat rate that wouldn't increase no matter how many times he defended or how spectacular the finishes were. Now, here's where it gets insulting. September 2016. The UFC debuts CM Punk, professional wrestler. 0 MMA experience. 0 wins at any level. He faces Mickey Gall, gets taken down immediately, and submitted in 2 minutes. CM Punk's disclosed purse, $500,000. Demetrius Johnson, at that time on his 9th consecutive title defense, was making a $175,000. CM Punk made nearly 3 times more to lose his debut fight than the most dominant champion in the UFC was making to defend his title. June 2018. CM Punk fights Mike Jackson, goes 0-2 in the UFC. His purse, another $500,000. Johnson publicly addressed this. He said, "I'm going on my 7th or 8th consecutive title defense. You've got CM Punk over here, who's making 500 bones, and it's his 2nd fight in the UFC. That's where that chip on my shoulder came from." When the UFC tried to pressure Johnson into fighting TJ Dillashaw, a bantamweight moving down in weight, without proper compensation, Johnson pushed back. "Yeah, pay me $1 million and I'll do it," he said. The UFC's response? They started talking about shutting down the entire flyweight division. In 2018, they nearly eliminated it entirely. The most dominant champion in company history, and they'd rather delete his weight class than pay him fairly. August 2018, UFC 227. Henry Cejudo catches Johnson with a perfectly timed right hand and stops him in the 4th round. After 11 consecutive title defenses, Johnson's reign ends. His purse for that fight, $470,000, his biggest paycheck in UFC history. After 11 title defenses and being the most dominant champion the UFC had ever seen. For comparison, Brock Lesnar made $8 million for one fight at UFC. 200, John Jones made $6 million for UFC 309. Conor McGregor was making $3 million guaranteed per fight by 2016. Randy Couture made over $1 million per fight back in 2007. Demetrius Johnson never made $1 million in a single fight, despite 11 title defenses. October 2018. The UFC trades Johnson to one championship for Ben Askren. Johnson's contract with one, $750,000 per fight plus $40,000 in sponsorships. Almost double what the UFC was paying him. Johnson went to one and became their flyweight champion. Won their Grand Prix. Got treated like a star. Made more money. Fought less frequently. Has openly talked about how much better his experience has been outside the UFC. The UFC had arguably the greatest pound-for-pound fighter in the world. They had a champion who broke every title defense record. They had spectacular finishes and technical mastery that made other elite fighters look amateur. And they paid him $175,000 per fight while paying CM Punk $500,000 to go 0-2. That's not a business decision. That's not about drawing power. That's about the UFC deciding what they think flyweights are worth, and then refusing to budge even when presented with the greatest flyweight fighter in history. Demetrius Johnson should have made millions per fight. He deserved PPV points. He earned respect and compensation equal to any champion in any division. Instead, he got disrespected, underpaid, and eventually traded away. The most dominant champion in UFC history, the longest title defense streak ever, and he never made $1 million in a single fight. That's the #1 worst paid champion in UFC history. 5 UFC champions. 5 world-class fighters who reached the absolute peak of their sport. Nico Montano, $24,000 to win a title, then discarded. Renan Barão, 32-fight win streak, making $116,000 per title defense. Jens Pulver, first lightweight champion, $30,000 per fight, forced to leave. Carlos Newton, $20,000 to win the title, left for Japan because Pride paid better. Demetrius Johnson, 11 title defenses, never made $1 million in a single fight, paid less than CM Punk. The pattern is clear. The UFC pays based on what they think they can get away with, not what fighters deserve. Fighters can't unionize, can't collectively bargain, can't fight for other organizations because the UFC has a monopoly. The money exists. The UFC makes billions. They just choose not to share it fairly. These 5 champions prove it. Talent doesn't matter. Dominance doesn't matter. Breaking records doesn't matter. If the UFC decides a fighter or division isn't worth promoting, that fighter doesn't get paid, regardless of skill level. Demetrius Johnson is thriving in one championship, making double what the UFC paid him. The others? Most faded into obscurity, never getting the compensation their accomplishments deserved. That's the reality of being a UFC champion in the wrong division, at the wrong time, without the star power the UFC decides matters. 5 fighters who achieved the impossible and got paid less than middle management for their trouble.